The Jewish Game of Conquest, Part 7. Today we're going to be speaking about the city of Beis Lechem. So if you look on your map, you'll see the city of Beis Lechem is immediately south of Jerusalem. It's right underneath Jerusalem. That's the city of Beis Lechem. It's in the territory of Yehuda, because it's right next to Yerushalayim, so it's obviously in the territory of Yehuda. The name Beis Lechem literally means, Beis Lechem means the house of bread. Beis is the house, and Lechem is of bread. In Arabic, it's interesting, Lechem in Arabic actually means meat. So Beis Lechem in Arabic means the house of meat. I guess it depends on how you look at things. What's your staple food? I guess in Arabic culture, maybe the staple food is meat, and in maybe Jewish culture, the staple food is more bread. So lechem just means like the main food. You could say it like that. The archaeologists want to say that originally this city actually predates the Jewish conquest. It existed, in Canaanite times and earlier, and they want to say that the city was actually originally named after a Babylonian god named Lachmu, some sort of Babylonian idol called Lachmu, or something like that. And so the city Beis Lechem was originally named after that. And they say it maintained the name Beis Lechem throughout the ages, although the meaning of the name changed. So like originally it meant, the house of this god Lachmu, and then eventually it came to mean the house of bread, and then in Arabic times, or under Arabic occupation, it meant the house of meat. The meaning changed, but the name of the actual city remained the same. So that's the meaning of the name Beis Lechem. In the Bible, or in English, it's called Bethlehem, right? In the Bible, the name Beis Lechem is also synonymous with another name of the city. The other alternate name of the city is Efrat, or Ephrata. It could be that Ephrata is not actually a separate name. Really, the name is Efrat, but it's called Ephrata in the context like this. There's an interesting grammatical rule in Hebrew that if you want to say to something, like to Egypt, right? So you have Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim, and to Egypt is Limitzrayim. But there's another, it's less common than adding a lit to the beginning of the word. You append in a hey at the end of the word. So instead of saying Limitzrayim, to Mitzrayim, you say Mitzrayim ma, and that means to Mitzrayim as well. So Efrat is the alternate name for Beis Lechem, and Ephrata is not another name per se, but Ephrata means to Efrat. Now, a person who's from Efrat can be described as an Ephrati, an Ephraite, right? The problem is that sometimes the word Ephrati refers to someone from the city of Efrat, and sometimes the term Ephrati is used to describe a person from the tribe of Ephraim. So every time you see the word Ephrati, you have to know, is it talking about someone from the city of Efrat, or is it talking about someone from the tribe of Ephraim? Usually based on the context, you could figure it out pretty easily. What's the meaning of the word Efrat? So the root of the word Efrat is like fruit. Like pru uruvu means to be fruitful and multiply. So it's referring to this population, the idea of growth in terms of population. So that's what the etymology of the word Efrat is, related to growth in that way. Fecundity, I believe is the word in English. Okay, so we're going to talk about the different times, different places that Beis Lechem is mentioned in Tanakh, and we'll try to see what we can learn out of that. Now, just one more quick fact before we continue. In the book of Joshua, chapter 19, verse 15, so he's going, in the book of Joshua, he goes through all the different cities that the Jewish people conquered in the Holy Land, and exactly to which tribe each city belonged to. So over there, in 1915, he says that there's a city, Beis Lechem, which belongs to the tribe of Zebulun. Now, the tribe of Zebulun is all the way up north. So he's obviously talking about a different city with the same name. It's another city called Beis Lechem, but it's not the Beis Lechem of Yehuda, it's the Beis Lechem of Zebulun.
Who says this?
This is explicit in the Bible, that there's another city called Beis Lechem that's in Zebulun. And so a lot of times when the Bible refers to the city of Beis Lechem, it calls it Beis Lechem Yehuda, Beis Lechem of Judah. because there's another Beis Lechem which doesn't belong to the tribe of Judah, which actually belongs to the tribe of Zvulun. marker. Okay, whatever. Thank you. Fine. So the first place that Beis Lechem is mentioned is in actually next week's parsha in Genesis 35. And what it is that Yaakov Avinu, we've spoken about in the last few days, Yaakov Avinu, after he went to Haran and he got married and he had 11 out of 12 of his children, so he returned to the Holy Land. So we said a few days ago that first he went to Shechem and he had all the incidents that happened in Shechem, and then after he left Shechem, because he wasn't so friendly with his neighbors anymore, so he went to the city Beis, and then really he's on his way home to go to Hebron to meet up with his father Yitzchak. So after he left Beis on his way to Hebron, so there's a somewhat bittersweet story that happens. This is in chapter 35, verse 16. It says, "Vayisu mi Beis El," and they traveled from Beis El. Vahi oikev ras haaretz lavai Efrasa, and there was still a stretch of land until they get to Efras. Vateled Rachel vatikash beledeta, and Rachel went into labor. She was giving birth, and she was having difficulty during her child. And it was while she was giving birth. So the midwife said to her, "Don't worry, you're going to have a son." And what happened was, as her child was being born, she was basically dying, and she called her son Ben Oni, the son of my affliction. And then his father, meaning Yaakov Avinu, called this son Binyamin or Vinyamin. His son is named Binyamin, the son of the right. So, and then Rachel dies. Vatamas Rachel. This is in verse 19. Rachel dies. Vatikaver b'derech Efras, and she's buried on the way to Efras. He Beis Lechem. That is Beis Lechem. So you see that Efras is another name for the city of Beis Lechem. Vayetzav Yaakov matzev al kavurasa. Yaakov set up a monument over her grave. He matzeves kavuras Rachel adayim. That is the monument of the grave of Rachel until this very day. Till today, people go there every, on the 11th of Mar Cheshvan. That's the day that Rachel died, and so people go there. There's actually a bus that goes from the buses that go from Jerusalem straight there. It's not so far. It goes straight to Beis Lechem. It's an interesting point, right? She called her son Ben Oni, the son of my affliction, and Yaakov Avinu called him Binyamin, the son of the right. What does it mean, the son of the right? What does it mean, right? I'm talking about right as opposed to right is as opposed to left, not right as in correct, right as opposed to left. That was not a political statement. What does it mean, the son of the right? So the way you look at it is like this: when God created man, when He created Adam, so Adam, his default position was facing eastwards. He was created facing the east. And that means that north was to his left and south was to his right. And in the Bible, the terms north and south are all, instead of saying north and south, it's Tzafon and Darom or Tzafon and Negev. So sometimes instead of saying north and south, it just says left and right. Right? Left means north and right means south. So given that, you can understand why this son of Yaakov Avinu is called the son of the right, because 11 out of 12 of his sons were born in Haran, which is northern Mesopotamia, which is north of the Holy Land, right? And so they are in the land of the left. They were born in the land of the left. Binyamin was born in the Holy Land, which is south of there, so he's born in the land of the right. So that's why it's called Binyamin. That's what the Medrash says. It's also an interesting geographical phenomenon that a friend of mine once pointed out. It says, I don't have a map of the world with me, but if you imagine the map of the world, so if you focus on the Gulf of Aden. The Gulf of Aden is this body of water which goes between the Horn of Africa and the west side of the Arabian Peninsula. Right? There's this body of water that goes there. It's called the Gulf of Aden. Right? So imagine if you're traveling up the Gulf of Aden, going up northwards. So on your right side, there'll be a small country in the southern tip of Arabia, of the Arabian Peninsula, called Yemen, and on your left side will be a country on the eastern coast of Africa, known as Somalia, which is very interesting because on your right you have Yemen, and on your left you have Somalia, which is small. So it's like that fits into like the Hebrew words for right and left, Yemen and small. Yemen and Somalia. So it's just an interesting phenomenon. I'm not sure what caused such a thing to happen. It's just a funny thing. So that's the first place that the city of Beis Lechem is mentioned in the Bible. The next place it's mentioned is again in the same context of Rachel dying and being buried in Beis Lechem / Efrat. And there it's talking about, this is in Parshas Vayechi, in the last Torah portion in the book of Genesis. And over there, Yaakov Avinu is sort of apologizing to his son Yosef. Yosef was Rachel's eldest son. She only had two sons, Yosef and Binyamin. And so Yaakov Avinu is sort of apologizing to Yosef and explaining that, you might look at it as if I didn't afford your mother the honor that's due to her because she wasn't buried with the other members of the family. Avram Avinu and Sarah were buried in Hebron in the cave of the patriarchs, in Marasa Machpelah. Yitzchak and Rivka were buried in the same place. Yaakov Avinu had already buried his wife Leah there, right? So Yosef would, you might have some complaint against me that I didn't bury your mother there. So Yaakov Avinu sort of apologizing, explaining the reason why I didn't bury her there is because we were on the road and I didn't want to drag her body around until we get to Hebron, so I buried her there on the spot. Right? So that's in Genesis 48, verse 7. He says, "Va'ani and I bevoi mi Padan, when I came from Padan, which is from Choran, meisa alai Rachel be'eretz Canaan baderech. My wife Rachel died in the land of Canaan on the road. Ba'ikir v'asaretz for Efrasa, when there was still a stretch of land to get to Efras. V'ekborah sham bederech Efras, and I buried her there on the road to Efras. He Beis Lechem. That is Beis Lechem. So again, Yaakov Avinu mentions that he buried her in this place called Efras / Beis Lechem. Right, that's the mentions of Efras and Beis Lechem in Genesis. Now we move on to the next place where it comes up, and this is not really explicit, but this is an interesting idea. In Exodus chapter 1, it talks about the famous story of the Jewish midwives. Right, the Pharaoh decreed that all Jewish babies, upon birth, these two Jewish midwives should kill all the Jewish babies as they're being born. Right. And these two Jewish midwives, whose names are Shifra and Puah, decide that they're going to go against the Pharaoh's decree and they're going to allow these children to live and help them, sustain them and keep them alive. They didn't kill the babies on birth. Right? Shifra and Puah. So who are Shifra and Puah, these two Jewish midwives? So there's one tradition that says that they were actually Egyptian women who converted to join the Jewish people. That's one tradition. But the other tradition says that Shifra and Puah were actually alternate names for two other characters that we know in the Bible. And they are Yocheved and Miriam. Yocheved is the mother of Moshe Rabbeinu, of Moses, and Miriam is the sister of Moses. Right? So Yocheved and Miriam are Shifra and Puah. So Miriam, who's known as Puah, had this alternate name, Puah, or Miriam Puah, different name. Why is she called Puah? So the Medrash says, because when the babies would be born and they'd be crying, so she would go like, poo, poo, to coo at them, to try to calm them down and stuff. So that's why she was called Puah. But the Torah tells us that these two Jewish midwives were God-fearing people, and therefore it says, Vayas lahem botim, God made for them houses. So the Talmud in Maseches Sota says, what does it mean that God gave them houses? What does it mean he gave these two midwives houses? The Gemara says he gave them not houses like a physical house, but it means he gave them special dynasties, special houses like the house of the Tudors and the house of the Stuarts or whatever. If you know about English history, it doesn't mean house. It doesn't mean a physical house. It means a certain dynasty. What are these houses? So the Gemara says it means he gave them the house of Kahuna, the priesthood, right, are descendants of Aaron, and Aaron was a son of Yocheved, right? And the Levites, one of the important Levite families were descendants of Moshe Rabbeinu, so that's the dynasty of the Levites. And then there's the kings. It says the kings are descendants of Miriam. Right? What does that mean that the kings are descendants of Miriam? So if you look over here, I wrote Miriam married somebody named Kalev. Right? Kalev was from the tribe of Yehuda. In fact, in the last year of the Jews traveling in the desert, So Kalev was actually the prince of the tribe of Yehuda. He was the leader of the tribe of Yehuda. We spoke about him before. He was one of the spies that Moshe Rabbeinu sent off, and he was one of the spies that Yeshua sent off as well. So Kalev is an important person, and he's from the tribe of Yehuda. Right? So Miriam and Kalev got married, and from that is going to be descended King David. Right? Let's do it like this. ... David. Right? King David David HaMelech is a descendant of Miriam and Kalev. So, as a reward for Miriam keeping these babies alive and not killing them like the Pharaoh had decreed, so she got this Beis, this house, which is the house of the kingship. Okay? Now, another what's it called? Another factor is like this. In the book of Chronicles, when it talks about Kalev, so it says that Kalev's wife was named Efrat. That was her name. Efrat is a common name amongst Israelis now. There's even people in America that have the name Efrat. It's a common name. But I thought her name was Miriam, right? So the Gemara says that Efrat is an alternate name for Miriam. And it's also, so Miriam had three names: Miriam, Pua, and Efrat. The Gemara says, why was she called Efrat? Because she was originally sick and she wasn't able to have children, and then she became better. She was healed, so then she was able to have children again. So Efrat, we said, is the root of the word is pri, is fruit, the ability to be fruitful. So then she got that ability after she was nursed back to health. So the Kalev helped nurse her back to health. So that's why she's called Efrat also. So that's Efrat. Miriam is another name for Miriam is Efrat, and the kingship of King David, the house of King David, are descendants of Miriam. Now it would seem that the reason why the city of Beis Lechem is called Efrat is because the inhabitants of the city were descendants of Miriam and Kalev, and Miriam was known as Efrat, so the descendants of them are called Ephratim as well. That's why they're called Ephratim. Okay, that's that point. The next thing is like this. The next place where Beis Lechem is mentioned is going to be in the book of Judges. In the book of Judges, in chapter 12, towards the end of the chapter, it says, this is what he's towards the end of the judges. Right, there were a whole bunch of judges that ruled the Jewish people for a period of like 400 years. So one of the last few judges. The last one is Samson, Shimshon. The one before him is Abdon ben Hillel. The one before him is Elon Zvuloni. And the one before him is someone named Ivtzan. So this is in Judges 12, verse 8. It says, after Jephthah, so the judge of the Jewish people was a man named Ivtzan from Beis Lechem. And it says that he had 30 sons and 30 daughters. And he married them all off, and he was the judge of the Jewish people for 7 years. And it says, Vayamas Ivtzan died, Vayikaver beVeis Lechem, and he was buried in Beis Lechem. So it doesn't really give us so many details about this Ivtzan character. All it tells us about him was that he was judged for 7 years, and that he had 30 sons and 30 daughters, and he married them all off, and that he was originally from Beis Lechem, and that he died and was buried in Beis Lechem. That's all we know about this Ivtzan character. The Talmud tells us in the tractate Bava Basra on page 91, so the Talmud says that Ivtzan is another name for another character in the Bible known as Boaz. So Ivtzan and Boaz are the same person. So who's Boaz? So Boaz is an important hero in the book of Ruth. Now we're going to speak about the famous book of Ruth. Or in Hebrew it's Ruth. Her name is Ruth. Right? The famous story of Ruth. You're familiar with the story of Ruth? So sorry, we'll say it over. I guess we'll say it over in abbreviated form, so we don't have to go into all the details. But basically, the story of Ruth is like this. There was a man. Well, let's say it like this. There was a man named Nachshon. Okay, Nachshon was an important person. He was actually also from the tribe of Yehuda, as you see his genealogy all the way up here, and Nachshon was actually also a prince of the tribe of Yehuda. He was the prince of the tribe of Yehuda in the first years of the Jews traveling in the desert. And Nachshon, he's actually famous for being the first person to jump into the Red Sea before the sea split. So he's the one who took the initiative and showed everyone that we can do this, we can believe in God and trust in Him, and He'll help us out. So he's the one who taught everyone that lesson. He also happened to have been the brother-in-law of Aaron HaKohen, right? Aaron, Moshe's brother. So it says in Exodus that he married somebody named Elisheva, the daughter of Avinadav, the sister of Nachshon. So Nachshon has a sister named Elisheva who's married to Aaron. So Nachshon is he's up there in the hierarchy. He's one of the noble, important people of the Jewish people. Anyways, so Nachshon has four sons over here. He has a son named Elimelech. He has a son named Salmon, also known as Salma in other sources. He has another son who in the Bible is not given a name. He's called Ploni Almoni, which is sort of the Hebrew equivalent of saying like John Doe, just a Mr. Anonymous. And the rabbinic tradition tells us that his name was actually Tov. And then he had another son, Nachshon had another son, who was the father of somebody named Naomi. Naomi's daddy. We don't know his name at all, but I just wrote Naomi's daddy. So like this guy Elimelech married Naomi. He married his niece. You're allowed to marry your niece according to halacha, right? So Elimelech was married to Naomi, and Elimelech was a very rich man. And in Elimelech's time, there was a famine in the Holy Land. And the Bible tells us in the beginning of Ruth, Elimelech he lived in Beis Lechem, and he was an Efrasi, and he lived in Beis Lechem, and there was a famine, and he left Beis Lechem, and he relocated, he and his family, he and his wife and his two sons, relocated to the land of the Moabites, to the land of Moab. That's what Elimelech did. Elimelech his two sons were named Machlon and Kilion. Those are the two sons of Elimelech. And it says that Machlon and Kilion, when they were there in the land of the Moabites, so Machlon and Kilion married Moabite women. Machlon married Ruth. Kilion married a woman named Orpah. And they lived there in the land of the Moabites. Now the Talmud tells us that by leaving the Holy Land and moving to the land of Moabites, Elimelech did something that was seriously wrong. Elimelech was a leader of the Jewish people in his time. The Gemara says he was a Gadol Adar. He was one of the great people of his generation. Elimelech, besides being an important, let's say, rabbinic leader of his generation, he was according to some sources, he was one of the judges himself. Besides that, Elimelech was also very rich. In fact, he had enough wealth that he could actually support the entire Jewish nation throughout that famine, if he wanted to. But instead, he decided to pick up and leave. And he left the Holy Land, went to the land of the Moabites, because he didn't want to take the responsibility of helping out his fellow Jews. And therefore, he deserved a punishment. First of all, he lost all his wealth. Second of all, he died. Third of all, he died, and his two sons died as well. So what's left is his widow. Her name is Naomi, and her two, former daughters-in-law, right? Ruth and Orpah. And so at this point, Naomi decides she's going to go back to the Holy Land, and she's going to try to hook up with her old relatives and try to see if they can help her get back on her feet. There's a halacha called yibum. They call it the levirate marriage in English, which if you don't understand Latin doesn't have any meaning to you. But a lever in Latin is a brother-in-law. Right? The halacha is if there's a man who dies without children, right? So his brother is supposed to marry his widow and establish a family in his deceased brother's name. It's called yibum. And when he does so he automatically gets the entire inheritance of his dead brother, and he's taking responsibility for the family and trying to help this poor widow and help her establish a family, and etc. Right?
Does that happen often today? So?
We don't do it now. The Torah tells in Deuteronomy, it says you either do yibum, or if you don't do yibum, so you do this other ceremony called chalitza, where basically the woman takes off the man's shoe and she says I want to be your wife and I wanted to be with you, whatever, and you're rejecting me. So by taking off the shoe, so he's sort of allowing her to marry somebody else. So it's official rejection ceremony. So basically nowadays we just do the rejection ceremony. There are some circles that still do yibum nowadays, but for the most part nobody really does it nowadays. For other technical considerations, especially in our promiscuous generation, so we suspect that maybe this guy who you think died without children actually did have children. And then if he did have children, so then not only is there no mitzvah for his brother to marry the widow, but there's actually a prohibition. It's considered incest. Normally, you're not allowed to marry your brother's wife, right? If there's a special mitzvah, then you're supposed to. But under normal circumstances, it's a very serious sin, so we don't usually do it. Okay. Anyways, so Naomi decides she's going to go back to the Holy Land, and she's going to try to find her husband's relatives, who are also actually her relatives, because she was her husband's niece, right? And see if they won't do necessarily yibum per se, but they would at least, take the responsibility and try to buy back the whatever it is that they had to sell because they lost all their money, and to try to help her get back on her feet. And so she decides she's going back to the Holy Land. And so she's taking leave of her two daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. And it talks about, in the book of Ruth, it talks about at great length, this whole conversation between them. And basically what ends up happening is that Orpah decides to leave her mother-in-law, and she stays in Moab. And Ruth decides that she's going to be extra loyal to her mother-in-law, and she's going to follow her to the Holy Land. And that's what happens. So Ruth and Naomi go back to the Holy Land. They go back to Beis Lechem. And basically what they do is that Ruth goes out to the fields, and she basically supports her mother-in-law from whatever is given to charity. There's certain halachas that halacha mandates certain forms of charity that are supposed to be given out in the field. Like, for example, if a person is harvesting their field and by mistake they dropped one or two stalks, so the halacha mandates that you're supposed to leave those stalks on the floor and allow the poor people to come get them. Or if you're bringing bundles into your house and you forgot a bundle outside, so you're supposed to leave it there and allow the poor people to enjoy the benefits of the bundles of those produce. So Ruth went out and she was making a living of that, of collecting these things, collecting these produce that was left out for poor people, and she was able to sustain herself and her mother-in-law through those efforts. And basically, at some point, Naomi tells Ruth that I'm too old to get married again, and I'm not going to be able to try to build up a relationship with the members of my family so that they would be able to redeem us and help us out. But you should be able to do it. You should go out and do it. And so she basically tells Ruth that she should go and marry a very rich man who happened to be also a very nice guy, whose name was Boaz. Now we said that Boaz is another name for the judge Ivtzan. We said that Ivtzan had 30 sons and 30 daughters. And the Talmud tells us that all 60 of his children died, because the Gemara explains that he did some sort of social snub to a different person who comes up in the book of Judges, someone named Manoach, who was the father of Shimshon, who didn't have any children. It's like he didn't invite him to his parties or whatever. So because of that, he wasn't sensitive to his fellow Jews, so all of his children died. And so Boaz is a fairly old man. Actually, according to some Midrashic interpretations, he was 400 years old. But, okay, that's not necessarily mainstream. But he was an old man, and he doesn't have any children, and he doesn't have a wife. And basically, what Naomi decided was that Ruth is going to come to him in the middle of the night and offer to, be with him. And basically, that's what Ruth does. Ruth goes and comes to his granary in the middle of the night and offers, I want you to marry me. And Boaz says, I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to take the responsibility to help you guys out, especially because I see all the good things that you did to my first cousin Naomi, that you were helping her out in that way. And so I am willing to marry, whatever. But the problem is that I can't do it right now. This is in the middle of the night. He could go there right now, consummate the marriage with her on the spot. But he said, I can't do it because there's somebody who has the right before me. There's somebody else who's a closer relative that he really deserves this responsibility first, and if he shirks that responsibility, so then I'll take it upon myself to marry you. But first we have to go to this guy. So the next morning they go to the town court, and they go to this guy. I guess it seems that Solomon was already dead or something, right? So they go to the court, and they offer the opportunity to Boaz's uncle, who is also Naomi's uncle. Right? His name is Ploni Almoni, Mr. John Doe, right? Who the rabbinic tradition tells us his name was Tov. And they say to Mr. Tov or Ploni Almoni, would you like to take the responsibility to marry this lady Ruth, who was Elimelech's former daughter-in-law, and buy back Elimelech's fields and help put Naomi's family back on their feet? And Mr. Tov says, no, I don't want to marry her. Why doesn't he want to marry her? Well, the truth is that Ruth was a Moabite woman, right? Elimelech's two sons married Moabite women. And so there's a halacha in Deuteronomy that says, Lo yavoy Ammoni u'Moavi b'kal Hashem. An Ammonite and a Moabite cannot join the congregation of God. You're not allowed to marry an Ammonite and a Moabite. But halachic tradition tells us that only applies to a male Ammoni or a male Moabite. But a female member of the Ammonite or Moabite nation is allowed to marry to the Jewish people after she converts in a proper way and everything.
So
Is
there any way that you can figure out who's from the Moabite?
Nowadays, these things don't really apply because all the nations were mixed up. The Gemara tells us that Sancherib, the king of Assyria, when he came and he conquered most of the civilized world, he mixed up all the different nations. And you can't say that the Ammonites or Moabites exist as a separate entity, that, these people are forbidden. No, all the nations, everyone's already mixed up. There is a question about the Egyptians. There's a prohibition of marrying a first and second generation convert who's an Egyptian. There is a disagreement between the commentators whether Egyptians nowadays have the halachic status of Egyptians in regard to this prohibition. I think that the consensus, even though there is this, the Shulchan Aruch brings both opinions, whether it's allowed or it's not allowed. I think that the consensus is that people allow it anyways. Okay, whatever. I don't want to get into the history of Egypt, but that's a. So Tov says no, I'm not marrying her. So Boaz says, okay, fine. So now I can marry you, and so Boaz marries her. Oh, sorry. Right. So rabbinic tradition says that the prohibition only applies to male Moabites and female Moab and male Ammonites, but not female Moabites or female Ammonites. So Tov said no because I felt maybe they're going to overturn this tradition or something else will happen and it'll make me look bad, so I want to marry her. But Boaz, he knew the halacha. He knew that the halacha is that he's allowed to marry her, and he's a responsible person. So he goes and he marries Ruth.
So was he hoping for that all along?
What? Boaz?
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems that, I don't know, hoping, but he took the responsibility. Okay. It's more of a responsibility than a hope. But so Boaz marries Ruth. The Talmud tells us, I don't remember if it's a Talmud or if it's a Midrashic tradition that tells us that he actually died, not long after he got married to her, but she became pregnant. And Ruth had a son. Ruth and Boaz together had a son named Oved, and Oved had a son named Yishai. And Yishai was the father of King David, right? So that's the genealogy, if you have over here on the board, all the way going down from Yehuda, the son of Yaakov Avinu, all the way down to David HaMelech. It goes through Boaz and Ruth, right? This is Boaz plus Ruth.
And Yishai was the one that never sinned?
Yes. The Gemara says that Yishai is one of 7 people who died by the bite of the snake, meaning the snake of Adam that brought death to the world. So most people in the world die not just because of the original sin, but because of their own sins as well. But there's some people that only died because of the original sin that Adam brought the concept of death into the world. So Yishai is one of those people. Binyamin is also one of those people as well, the son of Yaakov, Binyamin. Okay, there's another tradition that wants to say that this story that Boaz is not Iv's son, and this story actually happened earlier in the time of the judges, under the reign of the judge Ehud, who's the 3rd judge. That's what some people want to say based on the Zohar, or whatever, but this is the mainstream understanding. So that's the story of, that's the genealogy of David HaMelech in a nutshell. Right, so if you're going all the way down from Yaakov, you have Yaakov, then you have Yehuda. Yehuda had a son Peretz. Peretz had a son Chetzron. Chetzron had a son Ram. Ram had Aminadav. Aminadav had Nachshon. Nachshon had Salmon. Salmon had Boaz. Boaz had Oved. Oved had Yishai. Yishai had David. And the end of the book of Ruth ends with this genealogy tracing the family all the way down to King David, to David HaMelech. And that's one of the reasons why we read the book of Ruth on Shavuos, on the holiday of Shavuos, because according to tradition, David HaMelech was born and died on the holiday of Shavuos. So that's why we read it, because that's the day of his death, the anniversary, and it's his birthday. Now there's a little bit of before we get to we'll speak a little bit more about King David. There's a lot of different interesting things to talk about. So again, we mentioned that Elimelech and Boaz were both from Beis Lechem, right? Both called Efratim as well. Right? There's a famous song that people sing on Friday night in Kabbalah Shabbos called Lecha Dodi, written by Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz, who lived in the 16th century in Tzfas, Kabbalist. He actually wrote a commentary in the book of Ruth called Sherish Yishai, the root of Jesse. Right? One of the stanzas in his song Lecha Dodi, he writes, Hisnari me afar kumi, shake off the dust, get up, live she bigdei sifar techami, put on your splendid clothes, my nation. Al Yad ben Yishai Beis Halachmi, through the son of Yishai, through the son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite. Karvel nafshi, come close to my soul. Ge'olah, redeem it. Come, my beloved, to greet the bride, the Shabbos presence. Let us welcome it. Right. So there you see that Yishai is called a Beis Halachmi. It's called the Bethlehemite. Right. Okay, there's an explicit verse that calls King David David ben Ish Efrasi. David is the son of an Ephraite person, right? So he's also from the city of Beis Lechem, city of Efrat. Now there's an interesting question that the Marsha, one of the commentators on Gemara Sota on 11b, points out. We have the direct genealogy from Yehuda all the way to King David, right? So the question is, how did I say a few minutes ago that Miriam, whose alternate name is Efrat, she's the progenitor of King David. She's the matriarch of the kingship, right? I have all the names over here. Where does Kalev and Miriam come in, right? How does this side of the chart? How do you reconcile this chart with this chart? You hear the question? So the Marsha entertains the possibility that this person, and this person are the same person. That Ram and Kalev are alternate names of the same person. So then it will be that this guy Ram / Kalev married Miriam / Efrat / Pua, and then Aminadav, Nachshon, Salmon, Boaz, Yishai, David are all descendants of that union. That's what the Marsha entertains, that possibility. But he says that can't be, because it's explicit in Chronicles that Kalev and Ram were actually brothers. They were sons of Chetzron. They were both sons of Chetzron. So what does the Marsha say? The Marsha says that what you have to explain is that when we talk about the kingdom of David being descendants of Miriam and Kalev, that doesn't mean from the patrilineal line, because this is the patrilineal line, right? Father, son, father, son, father, son, father, son, father, son. Rather, it means that some female member of this family, of the Miriam Kalev union, some daughter, granddaughter, great-granddaughter, etc., somewhere along that line, married into this family over here, somewhere here, either his son, either married him, or married him, or married him, so that Elimelech is already going to be called an Efrati, right? He's called an Efrati because he's already a descendant of Miriam and Kalev, and he's also a descendant of this line. Right, so he's an Efrati, and then King David is going to be described as both an Efrati and a person from Beis Lechem. So that's how you would have to reconcile these sort of what would seem to be contradictory traditions. But the rabbis tell us, King David is a descendant of Miriam and Kalev, and then the Bible tells us that King David is a descendant of all this. Right, this is all explicit in the Bible. None of this is explicit. Right? Fine. Let's move on a little bit further. The next place that Beis Lechem really comes up in the Bible is in the book of Samuel 1, chapter 16. And that's when, Samuel, or the prophet Shmuel HaNavi, there's a street named after him, Shmuel HaNavi, so he's the one who anointed the first king of the Jewish people, King Shaul HaMelech, Saul, and Saul did all kinds of different things, and one of the things was that he failed to wipe out Amalek as properly required by God. So he failed in his capacity as king, and so Hashem decides that he's going to send Shmuel off to anoint a new king. Right? And so, this is in the beginning of chapter 16, Samuel 1, chapter 16. It says that God says to Samuel, "How long will you mourn over Saul when I've rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil." Meaning, you're going to go anoint a new guy. And go forth. I shall send you to Yishai of Beis Lechem. I'm sending you to this guy, Yishai Beis Lechem, for I have seen a king for myself among his sons. One of Yishai of Beis Lechem's sons, he's going to be the king. And Shmuel says, how am I going to do this? How if Shaul finds out that I'm going there to anoint a new king, he's going to kill me. So Hashem tells him, go pretend like you're offering a sacrifice there. Under the guise of offering a sacrifice, you're going to meet up with one of Yishai's sons, and you're going to anoint him as the king. And so fine, he goes. And Shmuel Navi goes to Beis Lechem to meet with Yishai's family, and the first one he meets is Yishai's oldest son Eliav, and he thinks that Eliav is supposed to be the new king. And Hashem says, "No, do not look at his appearance or at his tall stature. I rejected him. He's not going to be the king." He says the famous words, "Kiloi asher yireh ha'adam, ki adam yireh leinayim, Hashem yireh laleh." For it is not as man sees. Man sees with his eyes. God sees what's in the heart. Right? And Hashem, God tells him, Hashem says, "I've decided that this guy Eliav, the eldest son of Yishai, he's not going to be the king." And then Yishai calls in his son Avinadav, and Shmuel Navi thinks that, this guy Avinadav, he's going to be the next king. And God tells him, "No, he's not the one that I chose." And then Yishai brings out all his 7 sons, and God says, "No, about each one. No, this is not the one. This is not the one." And finally, Shmuel says to Yishai, says, "Are these all your kids? Do you have any more children?" And Yishai says, "Yeah, I have one more son. He's out there shepherding the sheep. He's a little kid. Not a little kid. He's a young guy. He's my youngest son. He's shepherding the sheep. He's the unlikely candidate to be the king." Right? So Shmuel Navi says to him, "No, bring him to me. I'm not going to leave until he arrives. We shouldn't sit down and dine until he arrives." Right? And so he goes and he sends forth for this youngest son, and this son is described as Hu Admoini. He's red. It's like he has red skin, red person. Im Yifei Einayim, with beautiful eyes. V'toiv Rai, and he had a pleasant appearance. And Vayomer Hashem, Kum Ashcheu Kizehu. Hashem said to Shmuel Navi, "Get up and anoint him, because he is the one that I have chosen." And so Shmuel Navi takes his horn of oil and he pours it over David, and he says, "You're going to be the next king." Right? And then there's all the vicissitudes of the relationship between King David and King Saul, and they chase after each other, and they make up, and they kiss and they make up, and then they fight and make up, and that's like the rest of the book of Samuel, right? Or at least Samuel 1. That's the whole story of David and Saul. So David HaMelech as well is from Beis Lechem, and he was anointed in the city of Beis Lechem. So there's an interesting thing over here that David HaMelech is described as being red, right? Armoini. He's being of a red appearance. So Esav is also described in the Bible as being, he was born, and it says, Vayetza Rishon Admoini. The first one, when Yitzchak had 2 sons, so the first one came out and he was Admoini, he was red. Right? And he was named Esav, and the second one was Yaakov. Right? So the same word used to describe Esav is used to describe David HaMelech. They're both called Admoini, they're both called red. So you asked me the other day, what's the significance of the fact that he's red? Like, what's this idea of red? So the idea is like this. Red, a person who's red, it means that he has a certain proclivity towards bloodshed. Red obviously represents blood, right? That's the most natural thing that red represents. Red is blood, and so a person who's red, it means that he's associated with bloodshed. Now, even if you believe, there's different opinions of this, exactly how it works in the Talmud. There's a concept called mazel, which is sort of similar to like the astrological horoscope type of idea, that there's certain influences that are coming from, let's say, like, the stars or the mazalos, the constellations and the planets or whatever. There's such a concept in Judaism, exactly how to apply it, where to apply it, whether we hold of it, whether we don't hold of it, whether it applies to Jews or only to non-Jews, all these different things. There's a lot of different details. But there is such a concept to some extent. But what does that mean? So what it means is that there's a certain proclivity, meaning a person is sort of pushed in a certain direction, but you can channel it the way you decide to channel it. So when we say that they're born red, it means that both Esav and King David were born with a certain inclination towards bloodshed. Now, bloodshed could be a good thing, and bloodshed could be a bad thing. It depends on the context, right? You can decide whether you want to use this power, let's say, of bloodshed for good or for bad. So Esav decided he's going to use it for bad. So he became a murderer. Right, so that's using bloodshed for bad. David HaMelech, he decided he's going to use his not necessarily bloodshed. But he's going to use the idea of shedding blood for helping spread the honor of Hashem. Conquering the enemies of the Jewish people, etc. And even that, to some extent, he's somewhat criticized in a certain way. That God tells him that you're not going to be the one to build the holy temple because you have too much blood on your hands. Only your son Shlomo, whose name literally means peace, he's going to be the one who builds the temple because he doesn't have as many blood in a sense. But a person who has this certain inclination towards bloodshed, he doesn't have to become a murderer, right? He doesn't have to become a Charles Manson, right? He can become a sheikhet. You know what a sheikhet is? A ritual slaughterer, right? Or he slaughters animals, right? There's your bloodshed. That's you get your fix. You kill animals, and you're supplying food for people, right? Or you could be a moel. You know what a moel is? A moel is a ritual circumciser, right? So you can channel that inclination to the good. You can also use it for the bad. You can use it for the good. You have a choice. As we've spoken about, I've mentioned the idea many times already. That a person always has a choice. You can do bad, or you can do good. God gives you the tools. So they had the tools. They had the tools for bloodshed, right? They were able. You and I don't know about you, but if I started trying to take a knife and killing an animal, I would probably faint, right? But a person who is more strong-hearted and would be able to withstand that, so he has a certain tool that God gave him. So you can use your tool for killing people, which is bad. You can join ISIS and behead people. Or you can be a sheikhet and you can shecht animals and you can slaughter animals and help supply animals meat to people. Or you can give children their circumcisions. Or you could be a doctor, right? Doctors also deal with blood, with gory things and stuff like that, right? So you work in the ER room. Right? So it all depends on what a person makes of it. God gives you the tools. You got to make of it whatever you decide to make of it. Okay, yeah.
Could red be called gingy?
What?
Could red be called gingy?
Yeah, that's what they call it, yeah.
There's no difference?
No, because there's a modern Hebrew term called gingy, which I think comes from like Hungarian or something. I'm not sure where it comes from. But it means a red-headed person. I don't know if we're talking about, when we're talking about King David and we're talking about Esav, it means they were red-headed, that their hair was red. I understand that it means that their skin was red.
Or both.
Or both, maybe. I don't know. It just says Admoni. It says they were reddish people. They call it Ruddy. R-U-D-D-Y. Rudy? How do you pronounce it? I don't know.
I wonder how Shlomo Melech looked.
I wonder too.
If he carried on the genes.
And so the city of Beis Lechem was a stronghold of support for King David. One second.
Is it connected with ginger?
What?
Is ginger connected with ginger?
I'm not sure.
What color is ginger?
I don't know. Ask Marianne.
Who's that? Who's that?
Ginger, Marianne. It's before your time. It's from the Gilligan's Island.
Even if it was during my time, I probably didn't read it.
I hear. Anyways.
We probably didn't have it in their Shiva library.
Right. Beis Lechem was historically a stronghold of support for King David. So like even when different people rebelled against him or when there was competition, so they always supported David HaMelech in different rebellions or whatever. So it was always that city.
When Saul wanted to know where he was.
What?
When Saul wanted to know where he was.
Yeah.
In the Haftorah that was in Machar HaKodesh.
Yeah.
I think it is.
But Yonasan. Yeah.
So where did Yonasan tell him he was?
In Beis Lechem.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, okay, but the city of Beis Lechem ultimately, along with all the other cities of Yehuda, was destroyed by the Babylonians when they destroyed the first temple and exiled the Jews to Babylonia. And in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, it says that when the Jews returned for the second temple, so they resettled in the city of Beis Lechem. Now, we'll end off with this last idea. Another place where Beis Lechem is mentioned, and that's in the book of the 12 minor prophets. Who said that they're minor, right? That's already a running joke, right? But the prophet of Micha. I don't know. We call it just the 12 prophets, Treyasar, which in Aramaic means the 12. The book of the 12, right? So in the
Did Goyim put it in that order, or
I don't know.
Wait.
Which order?
Have the 12.
No. The Gemara talks about it already. The Gemara Mesachas Bava Basra on page 15 talks about the order of the prophets within the 12 prophets. It says that Hosea has to be first, and then afterwards, I believe, is Yoel, Hosea, Yoel, Amos, Ovadia, and then Micha. So we're talking about the prophecy of Micha. This is in the book of the prophecy of Micha, chapter 5. Chapter 5. It says, now, this prophecy of Micha is talking about one of two things. Either it's talking about the Messiah, the future Mashiach, who's going to redeem the Jewish people, or it's talking about the king Chizkiyahu HaMelech, Hezekiah, who we'll speak more about when we speak about Yerushalayim on Sunday. You're going to be here Sunday, right? Okay. So, Micha says like this.
This is your prize Talmud.
My prize Talmud, right? Micha says...
You have a prize Talmud like this?
Yeah. I thought you were my prize Talmud. Micha says, V'yata...
We each say the other one is the prize Talmud.
Yeah. Micha says, V'yata Beis Lechem Efrasa. You, Beis Lechem Efrat. Right? Beis Lechem and Efrat are synonymous. Tzar liyas ba'alfei Yehuda. You are too young to be amongst the chiefs of Yehuda. Right? Because, Rashi explains, because, Beis Lechem and Efrat, slash Efrat, it was an unlikely candidate that the leader of the Jewish people is going to come from there. Because, who did Boaz marry? He married Ruth, who was a Moabite woman. Right? So who would think that the leadership is going to come from there? About them, about you, Beis Lechem Yehuda, about you, Beis Lechem Efrasa, what does Micha say? The prophet Micha says, Mimcha li yetzei. From you, Beis Lechem, someone will come for me. From you will come li. How do they translate it? But from you, someone will emerge for me. Liyos Mishal B'Yisrael.
Is this Lee?
1 second. Yeah. Liyos.
How many?
Me with a capital M. God is Micha speaking in the name of God.
How many qualities are there to a melech?
I don't know.
30.
30. Okay. Liyos.
Lamed of Lee.
Okay. Liyos Mishal B'Yisrael, to be a leader, to be a ruler of the Jewish people. And his origins are from the earliest times of old. Right? The Gemara tells us that the name of the Mashiach, the Medrash tells us the name of the Mashiach is something that God created before He created the world. It predates the world. What exactly is the name of Mashiach? There's different opinions. It's supposed to be Menachem, Shiloh, Yanai, different names that the Gemara talks about. But the name of the Mashiach is something that predates the world. So God is saying that the ruler of the Jewish people is going to come from you, Beis Lechem. Therefore, He will deliver them to their enemies until the time that a woman in childbirth gives birth, because the suffering and the pain that the Jewish people go through in exile is compared in the prophets to a woman giving birth. Right? It's painful right now, but eventually it's going to bring about something good. Something good is going to be born from that. Right? V'yeser Echav and the rest of his brothers, Yeshuvon al Bnei Yisrael, he's going to return to the Jewish people. So his brothers who are far away, he's going to return them. V'amad, and he's going to get up. V'ra'a ba'is Hashem, and he will lead with the strength of God. B'go'in Hashem Hashem alikav, with the majesty of the name of Hashem, his God. V'yashuvu k'atol yigdal arafsei oretz, and he will settle in peace. For at that time he will be great to the ends of the land. Right? This is the prophecy of Micha. What?
Is it have a Baal Yeshiva?
So
Is that what it says in the Bible?
no, it's talking about bringing back all the Jewish people and gathering them together. right? That's one of
Yeshiva.
the Rambam in the end of the end of the Laws of Kings. So the Rambam talks about who's going to be, the ultimate, the quintessential king of the Jewish people is going to be the last king, the Mashiach, which literally the word Mashiach means the anointed one, right? Or in Latin, the Christos, right? So he's going to be the anointed one. And it's one of the requirements to show who's going to be the Mashiach is that he's going to gather all the Jewish people together from all the far-flung places that they went in their exile.
Which
And
chapter Micha is this?
that's what chapter 5 in Micha. So Micha says that the Mashiach is going to come from Beis Lechem, right? What does that mean? The Mashiach is going to come from Beis Lechem. So what it means is that David Melech, who's from Beis Lechem, is going to be the ancestor of the Mashiach. Right? We always refer to Mashiach ben David, Mashiach the son of David. And Mashiach is going to be a descendant of King David. Right? That's what it means. The Mashiach is going to come from Beis Lechem. Now, from what I understand, what the Christians did was they took this idea and they understood that what does it mean that Mashiach is going to come from Beis Lechem? It's not talking about his genealogy per se, that he's going to be a descendant of King David who is from Beis Lechem, but they decided that it means that he's going to actually be born in Beis Lechem. And so they came up with the story of that guy who was born in Beis Lechem, of Bethlehem. Right? They have the Church of Nativity over there, and people go there for the pilgrimages every year in December. Right? And he was apparently born in Bethlehem. You probably know better than me. Does it say explicitly in the New Testament that he was born in Bethlehem? It says it explicitly, or that's from one of the later commentators?
I'm pretty sure explicitly.
It's explicit. Okay, so an interesting thing. Actually, I used to sometimes years ago I used to debate different Christian missionaries and whatever. So one of the things I would do that really pissed them off was I would never refer to that guy by his name. I would always refer to him as the bastard from Bethlehem. That's how I always referred to him. And then one time, one of these guys was a little bit knowledgeable in I guess in halacha or whatever. He said to him, when a bastard halacha is a mamzer, right? A mamzer is a person who's born. Well, it doesn't really translate into English so well. I actually once wrote a letter in the Jerusalem Post about this. But the word bastard in English means someone who's born out of wedlock, right? But the word mamzer in Hebrew doesn't mean someone born out of wedlock. It could mean someone born out of wedlock, but that's not the point. Mamzer is somebody born out of the union of forbidden relations. It's like if a man has relations with his mother or sister or daughter, and they have a kid, so that kid is a mamzer, and all their descendants are going to be a mamzer. If a woman has relations with someone outside of her, a married woman has relations with someone outside, we're almost done. A married woman has relations with someone outside of her marriage, so that kid is a mamzer. Right? So the halacha is if a Jewish woman who's married, she has relations with another Jewish man, right, who's not her husband, so they have a child, that kid is a mamzer. Right? What if a Jewish woman has relations with another man who's not Jewish? Right? So the halacha is the kid is not a mamzer, right? Because the father, it's not considered that that it was a union of two forbidden people, because we don't reckon with the father because he's not Jewish, so he's not part of the formula, right? So we just look at it as if this child is just a descendant of the mother and the father is just out of the picture, and he's Jewish because his mother is Jewish, right? So this child is not technically a mamzer. So I was once using the term bastard of Bethlehem to a Christian. I'd say the Jewish take on this guy is that his mother Mary had a little lamb, and she also had a little mamzer, right? But the way it is that the Jewish take was that she was married to this guy Joseph, or she was engaged to him, and she cheated on him with a Roman soldier there. And from that union of this Jewish woman Mary and this Gentile Roman soldier, that's where her son was born, if this whole story even happened at all, right? But that's the Jewish understanding of there's the different gospels, so there's the Jewish gospel. So this is our version of the story, right? So according to our version of the story, he was actually a child of this Jewish married woman and a non-Jewish man, right? Technically, halachically speaking, that doesn't make him a mamzer. Right? So someone's like, why do you call him a bastard of Bethlehem? He's not really a mamzer. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I still call him that though. But Anyway, the whole story is like somewhat problematic. Archaeologists want to argue that there's no evidence that there was a Jewish settlement in the city of Bethlehem over here in Yehuda in the time of the Second Temple period in the first century, and they want to say that if you're forced to say that this guy is from Bethlehem, so you must say that he's from the Bethlehem and Zvulun up north over here, which is not even what Michael's prophecy is talking about. If you understand it literally to mean a person from this city as opposed to a person of this genealogy. So that's the story of Bethlehem. Thank you for coming.